Okay, go. Do you see the thing?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Adam. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. A little busy. A little busy.
Yeah.
Um, I have been, this month has just been like a combination of like the grad school and we're doing these portfolios at work, uh, which is just like this big show we put on for parents, really. Like, we're not allowed to give, we rate kids on a scale of like 1 to 5 on a series of categories like behavior and writing and all these different things. We're not allowed to give lower than a 3.
Excuse me.
Yeah, we're it's and it just takes a long time. Like, I have like over 90 to do.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. I mean, do you have any other feelings about it? Like about
Well,
rating the kids or 90 of
I, I don't know. It's weird. Like, I don't even know if this was what I planned on talking about, but I feel like I'm used to doing these jobs where you have to find creative ways to get across to people. I'm used to working with older kids. I'm used to working with high schoolers mostly, and high schoolers are complicated. At least, and they definitely. Uh, it's an interesting challenge to figure out how to communicate certain things that I want them to do, that they have to do as an educator. But here, I have a language barrier. It's a completely different school system of education. So even it's a very, very hierarchical in terms of like who says what to who. Uh, and I came from a culture where asking questions to the teacher was a sign of engagement, but here asking questions is like almost like a challenge in some ways,
to the
and
teacher,
it's
you
not
mean? Like
to the
the
teacher.
would be challenging the teacher?
Yeah, and it is not necessarily to me, but the thing is that I'm working with much smaller children now, and I sometimes get. I don't think I spend a lot of time processing how much this job is taking a toll on me, because it's really difficult to get a kid to do something to look pristine, except for using the strategy, I'm big, you small, you listen to me.
Hmm.
um, and I've tried to find other ways to do it. I've tried to do it, but also this is what the teachers use, this is what they use. And it's not like I'm just yelling at the kids all the time, because I'm not. And in some ways, this job is great and fun and goofy, and I get to just like entertain kids sometimes. But I've made a bunch of kids cry this year, and in some ways, that's okay with me. Like, it's really okay, because like I do think that some kids just cry because they didn't get their way, and it is important to learn that, like, even if you're upset, life does go on. But sometimes I'm just like, okay, this kid is upset. Good, that means they won't do it again. And then I'm just like, man, that's so messed up, but I don't know how else to do it.
Yeah. So in the past, when you have done this work, because you've worked with kids, right, a bunch, many times in different environments,
Yeah,
and you said that this year it seems to be standing out a little bit. And these not only the cultural differences, but also the emotions of the children.
yeah.
I just want to hear more about how that's making you feel, or what some of those differences were between maybe in the past when you feel like maybe you didn't make kids cry so much that summer, but this summer it's more. Um, yeah, because that's definitely a challenging.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so I mean, like, to be clear, in my last job when I was a wilderness therapy guide, kids cried all the time. I mean, that's just the nature of therapeutic work sometimes. And they would cry for a variety of reasons. But, you know, we would always try to make sure that we were communicating things the most effectively. First of all, we would never yell, because that just loses all of, you know, the poker chips that you gain up with the kid. And you were allowed to be a little bit more patient, you know, like it's a little bit different here, because if somebody doesn't do their work, you know, my last job, it was like, okay, well, that's just a page you're going to have to get done sometime. So you get all the time in the world, you know, don't either do it now or do it tomorrow. But like, you know, if you do it today, you know, you have more time to do the things that you can do tomorrow. And then that gets you closer to completing the program.
Right.
Yeah, it's a long format of the program.
How are those feelings though? Like the feelings connected to
how did I feel
cry
doing
at
that?
wilderness camp versus having kids cry in this environment? Like how are you feeling about
it? It's still sometimes tough. You know, because actually it depends on the situation. You know, it depends on what kind of group I was working with. I had boys groups and I had girls groups. In the boys groups, if they cried, to be honest, it wasn't that it felt good to make them cry, but then I was just like, okay, good, mission accomplished. We're bringing some emotions out. We can explore now.
Mm-hmm.
Because in general, this is what the clinical team kind of helped us to understand, that in most boys groups, not all of them, but most boys groups, the goal was this kid's built up so many walls, let's tear down some so we can bring out some emotions. And in most of the girls groups, it was the opposite. It was like, wow, no walls, let's build up a few healthy boundaries. And so, to be honest, when I was working in girls groups, I really was not very good at it. I did feel like I was walking on eggshells sometimes, and if a teenage girl cried because I said something the wrong way, or because they took something the wrong way, or I was like, it was kind of like a fuck, no, I can't believe I just did it again. It's like, how am I going to get this person to trust me now? But again, so it felt like, I don't know how to I felt kind of lost when that would happen here. But here, and just to be clear, like this is a place where, like, if a kid doesn't finish his math page, like, hold their hand and get them to do it. Like, it doesn't matter if they've understood it. Their parents are going to take a look at the textbook and they need to see that every page is done.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. Like,
that's a lot of pressure. It sounds like too, you know, on you, but also, you know, if you feel like the child is not necessarily getting it, but it's just like visually demonstrate that it's happened.
Yeah. No,
it's kind of challenging.
It's a system that works for the kids that do, and that doesn't for the kids that don't. Like,
right. Yeah.
It's really, and like parents here are really like sheltered from the realities of their kid. Like, you'll get to a kid who's in a class where, like, most kids are like kind of like here on English, and he's just like way down here on English. And it's just because he's just going to get shifted along. He won't be moved to a lower level because the parents wouldn't like that. So he'll just be in the school, and the parents will be just like flushing this money down the toilet.
Mm-hmm. I want to explore, if it's okay, Adam, for the sake of time, two themes that I've kind of see popping up. One of them is just communication, and just like, you know, just kind of reflecting on the challenges that you have where you are now. And just thinking about what those comparisons are, and, you know, what you could be getting out of this, or some other lessons that could be learned in this process. But something you said that was very interesting to me, that I really thought was kind of a hidden gem was when you were speaking about the walls and the boundaries and those sort
Mhm.
of gender binaries between the
Mhm.
boys and the girls.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's a lot to pull out of that
Mhm.
as a teacher, as someone who's teaching and recognizing these things
Yeah.
for not only yourself, but just, of the bigger picture of the world. And so I wouldn't mind kind of, and I think communication and when you think about communication and walls or boundaries
Mhm.
and children and who has those up, who has them down and why, I think there's a lot of really great information in even just that one thing to think about. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to explore that just for the next 5 minutes or so before our time's up a little
Sure.
bit. Um, so I'm just going to ask you a couple questions about specifically, how when thinking about this balance or imbalance, I guess it's more of an imbalance than a balance between, boys having their walls up and just trying to get something down and girls having, very low, not enough boundaries. I just wanted
Mhm.
to think about and hear more from you, how maybe that's shown up in society or in your life or how you interpret that. There's just in any way, like just what that makes you think about. And then also, if you could just think about what that means for you as a teacher, because I think there's a lot of, yeah, there's a
Well,
lot there.
I mean, one thing I should say about that is that, like, I think of myself as a person who grew up with a lot of very strong female role models.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the thing about this program is that how that balance came up was that, these were talking about kind of extreme cases for high schoolers. When I've worked in other high school programs, uh, I don't. I haven't really felt that tenuous balance because we weren't talking in the realm of the emotion, and I wasn't working with kids who were kind of on uh, demonstrating extremes of behavior. And then definitely in both groups, we had uh, boys with no boundaries and girls with all the walls up. We had those as well. Um, I'm sorry. What's the question? The
Yeah,
question
so
is,
no, that's okay because it
yeah,
is, yeah. So I mean, so basically you're telling me now that, that this may not be something that could be applied in every single case, which is fair. However, I do think that
yeah,
that there that your statement and also why you chose that statement, is important in and of itself. And I'm just thinking about what are some of the things that we could pull out of this to make this experience of having to navigate these children in a different
yeah,
way, around communication and what you could pull from this experience. Even if it is, not agreeing with this practice
well,
or agreeing with it, or how you can implement new or different ways of thinking when you return and teach in America again. But what could you pull out of that experience around, how people are thinking about children in South Korea?
I think that one of the clear things and like is that it's really easy to stay in Korea and just teach English for like 20 years. People do it all the time. It's not like the work itself, except for like these kinds of like, what am I doing? Is this even good for anybody? Like these kinds of moments, it is pretty easy. But like, there's a reason why I want to go back to the States, or just I don't want to be in Korea, and I think it's because that uh, I just don't think I can deal with this worldview of how to raise children.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
What are
you
the
know,
major differences, the primary differences, if you could just put them in a few words that come to mind, that you're just like, nope, nope.
I think that kids here are so overworked,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's becoming an issue. But in the States when I was working with high schoolers as well, but there's just so much pressure to exceed. There's tracking starting in like kindergarten. I think that kids here are just kind of seen as a vehicle to serve the parents.
Mm-hmm.
I have had moments where I'm like, wow, this is amazing. These kids can barely speak English, and I like know very minimal Korean, and I'm still finding ways to understand each other. Like that stuff's incredible to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I was teaching kids like what does it mean to be grounded, because I was teaching them a novel, and they're like, oh, well, that means when except for school, you're not allowed to leave the house. And the kid was like, teacher, the only time I leave the house is to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, oh my God. Like, I think that they really, really don't care how the kid is feeling
Mm-hmm.
here. Every time I've tried to strategize with a teacher about it, it's really backfired. Not like backfired horribly. I just want to be in a place where I share the values of the people that I'm working with.
Can I ask you one more question before we have to part? But I'm just wondering is there anything culturally that you think is different that makes this culture versus our culture see children in this way? I mean, are there any obvious differences that you could maybe, think about building that compassion, but like understanding why they may operate this way and we operate in another way?
Well, for one thing, I would say that a lot of this stems back from a lot of this you can see pretty easily demonstrated in the language.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite common for people to introduce each other and ask the question like, how old are you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so that they can know how to address you.
So the age and the authoritative nature of things.
Yeah, and that plays out, I know, in adulthood as well. That in work and can be a real problem with efficiency and getting ideas disseminated. So how they feel about children is reflected in the language, and also there is a lot of there's kind of this fusion of like hyper capitalism with like Confucianism. There's an idea of like neo Confucianism, which is just the give respect where it's due, and if you're a child, the respect is to the elder. Not always. It's not like the kids are just sitting there like respecting me. But
Mm-hmm.
I had a really fucked up thought the other day, because I was like, why, if it really is this hierarchical system, why is it sometimes so difficult to get these kids to be quiet? And I had a really fucked up thought where I was just like, because I was reading about domestic violence in Korea. It's like, could it possibly be that because I haven't hit them, they don't like give me, they're not like, it's not that I want to hit them or I would use that system, like, but
So you're saying that domestic violence is very high?
Oh yeah. It's really hard to address because slander laws are like really strict here. Like if you call the police on somebody for domestic violence and the person knows who you are, you can get sued.
Wow. Even
Yeah,
if, even if it came out to be the case.
yeah, but it's really swept under. Child protection laws are very, very recent.
What are your assumptions about where that power is coming from?
Where that power is coming from?
So domestic violence, when we think about that kind of violence, I'm really interested because I think this communication you started off talking about communication, and then, we kind of addressed, feelings and barriers and boundaries and walls up or down. And this kind of led into this this another sort of binary between our culture and their culture and why it could be that way, age differences. But I think also I'm wondering, when we talk about domestic violence in America, oftentimes, we know that anybody has the, capacity to abuse, right? There's no like one person. However, there are trends. And so I'm just wondering, how to tie, how can we tie in some of these, practices, and then also thinking about, domestic violence and where that power is coming from. Because, especially if we're thinking about boys and having those walls up and just working so hard to get them down. And then, I'm wondering if the maleness is connected to the domestic violence, because if there is if there's an assumption of age power, is there also a gender power dynamic there as well in families?
It's hard to know, because remember, most of my exposure to Koreans are people under the age of 12. And so the dynamics I really see are, aside from outside of like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu where I go and, that's probably like the other most Korean exposure I get. So, let's see. But I do notice a lot of things. Like people are shocked when I tell them about some of my kids if they work with older kids.
People like in this country?
Yeah, in this country, because they'll work with high schoolers or college students, or they'll be doing graduate stuff. And I'll tell them about these kids like running around and jumping on me and like whatever, and all the best stuff that kids do. And they'll be like, "Those are Korean kids." Like, because like by the time that they hit like 12, it's a lot more quiet, more subdued, they're exhausted. They're working all the time. They work more, definitely more. Like these kids are going to school.
You mean besides school, but also jobs?
No, they're going to school. Like they'll go to public school, then they'll go to academy school where they'll maybe focus on English.
Wow.
Maybe if their parents want them to they could go to a swimming school or a taekwondo school, but it's like
it's all day is learning.
It's all day. Like high schoolers will come home at 10. Well, no, they'll end school at 10 p.m., but they might go home at 11.
Wow. Yeah. So Adam, what is it that, because there's so much here, because this is definitely a cultural experience, right? I mean, this is a moment for you where there is vast differences, the process, that are also affecting your work, how you see your work, how you see yourself, how, having to change how you approach your work. What do you think? What do you think is the lesson to be learned here? Or at least a place to start?
I don't know. I think that one of the reasons I came here was because I was doing all this like super quote unquote meaningful work in the States, and because that's what I gravitate towards. But both me and my partner were feeling so burned out by it that we were like, let's take a year, let's do the teach English thing, and let's just experience a different country. And we both came to the same conclusion that like this is not that we can't really do this again. Like, yes, we could travel again, we could work in other countries again, but we need to really make sure like that. I think the hard thing sometimes is that like a few things. One, that my values aren't aligned, and that I just need to keep on making sure that where I work, my values are.
So it's an issue of integrity, really.
Yeah. I think that have this feeling, and then you know, right before I came, I had written my own curriculum that I did at this camp, and it was the most powerful experience. And I had people trusting me with journal entries about their relationships with their parents and their friends and all this different stuff. And I like worked my ass off to get to this point, and I was like, oh my God, what an educational high. And then now I'm here, and that kind of work I'm out of practice with. And I sometimes worry that I'm going to go back to the States to that kind of work, and I'm not going to start where I left off. I'm going to start a little bit behind that, because, you know, I'm afraid of what I might have picked up here, and I'm afraid that it might come home with me.
Oh, wow.
Even though I know it's not what I want, I know that this is just something that was part of my job here. It's still something that I've been doing for a year. You know, I'm terrified that I've internalized it.
I think that, you know, we're just about out of time, Adam, but I think that you really just did a great job today. I mean, what you've just said and being able to talk through this and getting to kind of down to the nitty gritty about how being in this different environment, that you can you will internalize. I mean, we are always in this, you know, everything's coming at us and it's going to live in us, you know, and I think that is a really incredible way to process, you know, this experience, in thinking about how it could internalize, could become something in you that you're not necessarily proud of, or that you might not want to bring back when you work with other children, wherever that may be. And even there, you know, and I think, you know, next time we can continue this conversation, because I think there's still a lot more to pull out here. You know, in exploring that fear around how you've internalized this sort of different, very, very opposite, it seems in a lot of ways, of your, which is why it's an issue of integrity. So
Yeah.
I think you did a really fantastic job. I'm really glad you came in today. Thank you.
Thank you.
If it's okay, next week we'll pick up where we left off.
Okay.
Thanks, Adam.
All right. Thank you. Hi. Good morning.
Hi.
Evening.
Good
Sorry.
evening. Good evening. Good morning. Both.
We do this. We do the same joke every time.
I know. It never gets old, though.
Never gets old because it never changes. So, what would you like to talk about today?
You know, I've been thinking a lot about how just feeling, you know, in thinking about just, it's kind of a broad theme, but I guess, like, you know, feeling stupid or not enough, has been kind of always just something that I struggle with, whether it was like when I was young or now as an adult or in my work or whatever it is. I just have this really huge, I don't even know if it's a fear. It's more of like a, maybe, I don't know, I can't find the right word for it, but I feel like I'm just always walking on eggshells trying to prove myself all the time, constantly. And I'm not
on eggshells. So that's a really interesting phrase, walking on eggshells. So when I think about that phrase, the image I have is somebody walking barefoot on eggshells. What's not clear to me, though, in that image is, are those eggshells supposed to be like full eggs, or are they supposed to be broken eggs?
in my mind, they're broken.
They're
Already.
broken. Okay.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way. I never think about the eggs. I just think about spiky things.
So it's actually, so it's more of a symbolism of pain.
Yeah, or like creeping around. Like, how do I do so? Everything I do is loud. It's like everything I do is like, I'm trying to just go about my business and just do my work and use my mind. But every turn, somebody's like, no, it's like I step on the thing and then all of a sudden everybody around goes, like they heard the crack and then they stop me and they go, oh, no, 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 you can't. That's not right.
Mm.
And, or I'm waiting for it, even if it doesn't always happen, it's like an anxiety that I have, that when it doesn't happen, I'm like surprised and happy, but I'm like always ready for somebody to tell me that that was a shit job, even though in the bigger picture of it, I don't have a lot, like in the bigger picture, it doesn't actually happen all the time. It happens less, than it doesn't, it's usually not the case, but it does happen enough that people are questioning my capability. And it's usually a specific kind of person.
Tell me about that kind of person.
And I've been, it's funny because I think about this a lot, probably because of the nature of my work, like I have to think about it a lot, but especially since my mom passed away, I've been thinking, my mom's white, was white, a white woman, and my dad was a white man, and I was raised by white people, which is interesting because I've internalized a lot of white cultural norms of whatever that means, but I'm not a white person. So it's interesting being raised, in a certain way and then going out into the world and realizing that that's not the case. Like I was raised with a fearlessness, I think that I got due to my like proximity to them. Whereas I think that if I was raised by people of color, I think I would have been warned more of the harshness of the world than I was. I was warned, don't get me wrong, but I don't think I was warned to the extent. Plus I didn't experience I didn't watch any, discrimination and things like that. My parents go through that. I didn't have to endure that. I didn't see it, whereas like if I was a black child raised by black parents, they would have probably explained these things to me, but also I could observe, what their life was like, what it was like being them, whereas I didn't have that. I just kind of saw what it meant to be white. And that's kind of like safeness that they had that they told me that I didn't have, but it was just kind of different. I still had this sort of like fearlessness, which was nice, because I do think that part of why I am who I am and why I'm an entrepreneur and why I've been able to like do the work that I do is because of that, is because I think that my fears were slightly less. I don't know how to explain this well, but I think it doesn't matter. But I think about like, I was saying my mom, because I've noticed that in my work, well, even in school, even when I was a kid or in school, white men never really, I would have my feelings about it, but it wasn't something that I felt particularly threatened by. If a male was putting me down or saying that I wasn't, just making me feel like I was as, stupid or didn't know what I was talking about or whatever, it doesn't bother me as much. I didn't internalize that as much. It just kind of was like, they're horrible, whatever, they don't know. It didn't do much to me. It didn't get me down. It was easier to write off, even when I was a child. But I also was so close. My dad was very hands-off, and my mom, like, not hands-off, that's not true. He was hands-on, but he was also kind of hands-off. He was very much like, I don't know how to explain that. But my mom and I were like every day we talked on the phone my whole life. Everything, was very like, she was just so supportive, and I noticed that the people who challenge me the most, and I don't mean just they challenge me, because I get challenged all the time by all kinds of people, but a lot of times it doesn't bother me. So when I think about who is actually bothering me, when I get really worked up, it's always a white woman. And I'm just almost always, I hardly ever care. I mean, a black man could say whatever and I'll get annoyed or be like, whatever. It's not internalized. Do you know what I mean, Adam? Like when I keep saying, I'm so tired. I'm having a hard time with my words.
No, I think I understand. I think it would be helpful if you told me about a time where a white woman. So I just want to point out to something that I'm hearing here, because I find it really fascinating that you just said what you just said. Because in our work in the past, we've talked about your difficulty and your the challenges that you have with trusting white men. But here you're talking about not generally white women, but when the challenges do come up, it is a white woman.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
And you can do it without whatever you want. But I would also love to hear an experience where you felt particularly challenged in this really harmful way by this kind of person.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you use the word harmful, because I think that it's violent when it happens to me. I mean, it feels very violent. And it's happened to me so many times. But so I have talked in the past about not how I don't inherently trust white people generally. But I also don't inherently trust most people, but particularly, but I think like also that makes sense. I'm a black person. Like I don't really have a lot of proof in the pudding.
Mm-hmm.
But to like just be like, yay, I know that you're going to protect me forever. You're probably not. As soon as I say something you don't like, we're probably not going to like be able to get through that. And that doesn't mean that I have phenomenal friends who are white, who we totally have had these challenges. So it's not that it's not possible, but it is work. And I think in terms of the general public that it's, that's the case. But there is a protection there that I do think is valid. But the trust conversation that we've had in the past, I think, is very different. I think that I've also had a tendency to trust white women more, which is also why I'm more hurt by it.
Ah, interesting.
So, yeah, and I think that's because of my mom. I think that I have inherently been more trusting of white women than I have of white men. Because white men, to me, are like the double negative, right? It's like they're men and they're white.
Mm-hmm.
They, just tread lightly. And, and I have kind of this process before I know that I'm safe in that space, right? But with white women, I feel like it's been so much easier for me to get brought in, and then they just like wow out on you. The second they're like I just feel like there's so much, they internalize everything that comes out of my mouth. It's like, if I make one challenge, it's so personal. It always becomes about them. Always. It always becomes about them. Every time I say like my thought, and I think that the reason this is hard is because intellectually, my mother like really thought I was really smart, right? Like she always made like a point to say that, especially because as a black girl, people don't treat you that way. They don't, or when you are smart, they're like surprised. They're like, oh, wow. It's a pretty like, it's weird. It's a weird line to walk. And I found that like, especially now that I'm like an actual, like close to, I don't really believe in like experts, right? I mean, we're always learning, we're always growing, we can always be better. But I'm like pretty damn good at like what I do. I don't know everything, but I do know what I know. And I can recognize what I know very quickly in terms of what's happening. And I just see it all the time. Like as soon as I challenge something, even in school, when I was younger, in school, grade school, high school, college even, as soon as I would challenge something, it would just be like, how dare you? how dare you like make this challenge? Um, and that would often be followed up by threats, you know, around how they would affect my life negatively. I just had a deja vu, so that's really weird.
That's interesting.
I think this happened to me once before, but I guess maybe that's because we talk all the time. But you know, I just, you know, and then you asked me another question around like specific situations. I mean, Adam,
Yeah.
it's funny. They're all the same. They're all almost identical situations. That's what's weird about it. I mean, I'll explain what that looks like, but I just want you to know, like, it's not like these crazy different things are happening all the time. And it's like, well, it's literally like always the same thing. And it always is as soon as I say something. And also, like, you have to remember, my line of work is to talk about identity, is to talk about race, is to talk about it's my job. It's who I am, it's my life, but it's also my job. My job is to guide people through understanding who they are and what that means. That's my job every day of my life. I take it very seriously. It's my livelihood. I run the company, which is a whole nother layer of stress and work for some. So clearly I think that this is important and I understand it very well. But it's like, I just feel like white women will never, I think there's some validation there. I think that
I just want to flag for a second, because I think that I just want to point out that I'm hearing some speaking in generalizations, which is fair because if you're talking about your experience and you feel a generalization, but I just want to make sure that we're getting, in the time we have left, to the specific example, which, you know, I believe you when you say that it says that they're all the same. So if they are all the same, then I think telling me maybe the latest scenario will probably give me an image of all of them.
Okay. The first woman that comes to mind is in my last round of college. I actually studied race and gender and all those things. And it was it was a very fancy all-girls school, and it was primarily white. Their idea of diversity was like, well, we had a couple of people from Africa, so it's diverse, but it was definitely no one like me, and very few. I mean, there were people, but it was very few. And which was very odd to study race and gender in such a homogenous space, as you can imagine, right? Everybody's white, sitting around talking about you, basically. Reading Toni Morrison. This is very awkward. You know what I mean? And I'm like sitting there listening to all of this. And this woman, her name was Anissa Wardy, and I respected her. I liked her because I do think because of my mother that I have this like initial need to be validated by white women. I think that's like a real thing. That was like right before you wanted an example that I was kind of like realizing like, whoa, like, yeah, like I need this validation. And at first I want that validation and then I don't get it and it goes down. But this woman, so like I said, you can imagine, and I'm a humanities person. So, I mean, I did theory all day long. I mean, that's all I did was theory, you know. Cultural criticism is what I did. So, you know, here I am in this room where almost all my classes were me and all white women because it's also an all-girls school. So it's me, a whole room of almost all white women. I think maybe I only had a couple of classes where there was like maybe one other person of color. But for the most part, it was me, maybe one other person, and a whole room full of white women and a white Jewish woman in front of me teaching me about race. So you can imagine I would challenge things, not to be difficult because I have no interest in being difficult, but I also was raised to think deeply about everything. So when I disagreed, I would say like, I don't know if I agree. Like I don't or I would add to it. I would go like, okay, but also these other things, you know, also it's also this. But it would always turn into this, punishment. I was always punished for exploring something that to me was very real, that I felt there was very real proof very real energy understanding, a school of thought. There was school of thought, right? It wasn't just like I was coming up with this off the top of my head. I mean, a lot of the things that I thought and felt were because I did read a lot. I might not have been reading what this teacher was reading. You know, I was doing my work, but you know what I'm saying. I wasn't necessarily like doing what she said, but you know, I don't know what she read in her spare time. But I mean, I was validated in my thought process because I had parents that were, like I said, like very smart, very brilliant. They were like, my parents would read like 5 books in 2 weeks about like the newest whatever. So I was very in the know. So
Yeah.
I would feel validated in what I was saying, and they would always punish me. So I noticed that in this class, because I have this, you know, most of my classes were the same woman because she was the head of the department. That in this class, she would, you know, most of the kids, we were, I mean, also I was older in this class, so I went to school twice. I mean, you know, I've gone to school many times for different things. So I was an older student. So a lot of the kids were, I call them kids because they were like in their, you know, 19, 20, you know, and I was like in my mid 20s at this time. And, you know, they would just repeat her. They would just literally, you know, this is what this says and this is what my answer is. You know, it was just there wasn't thought. It was just repetition, which, you know, is a very traditional way of learning, you know, just repeat. But I didn't believe in repeating. Also, I went to school for, you know, for English, you know, theory, because I loved the idea of building off of an idea, not just like, you know, also that's the whole point of going to school to me, is to grow in that way. But, so that particular teacher, I didn't do horrible in her class somehow. I don't know, because I finished the class and I thought, oh my God, I like practically failed. I ended up doing really well because I guess the stuff that I didn't do well on, I ended up doing really well on some other things, which was strange because I've always been like pretty much a straight A student in any class. But the punishment to me kind of came later when I had to write a, you know, like a thesis, you know.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write about adoption because obviously I'm interested in writing about that. And they didn't have anybody in the school that would support like they didn't have anybody that knew anything about adoption, basically. So they kind of had like a freak out. They were like, we don't know. And they pretty much deterred me from writing about that. Asked me to, ended up pairing me with a woman, another white woman who considered adopting, never actually did, and then wrote an academic paper about her experience, which to me is just like, just disgusting and it's just gross to me. And then I'm supposed to work with this woman about my topic, and she's supposed to be the expert, right? And it's interesting, you know, when we think about like, you know, who we're just supposed to respect, right? And who's supposed to like be in the know and who's not. So anyway, all she did was like write about Jane Eyre, and you know, I don't know if you probably never read Jane Eyre, but anyway, it's stupid. So I was like, forget it. I just changed the whole thing. I was like, I'm just gonna just placate, basically. I'll just write about like, okay, I know what you want. You want me to write about some like blackness, you know, current cultural, pop culture thing and compare it to some historical, whatever, narrative of your favorite Black writers, basically. So eventually I just did that. I just was like, you know what, screw you. I'm just going to do what you want me to do. Fine, I'll play your stupid game. You've made it impossible for me to actually use my mind. Meanwhile, this is an extremely expensive university. I mean, I'm talking like one of the few all-women's colleges left. You know, it probably put me a solid $100,000 in the hole, and I'd only gone there for a 3-year program, so it wasn't even like a 4-year university. So it was crazy. Yeah, so I'm like, these are the people I'm paying, right? I pay you. Yeah, I think that's the hard thing for me with teachers is like they forget, like, I'm paying you, not the other way, you know, not the other way around. Like, you know, you have to walk me through it, but also like there should be a level of respect there for us, like as students, you know. I think that it can be very hierarchical. But anyway, all is said and done, I write the stupid paper. I was so angry at the time, I even put the N-word in the title. I mean, mind you, I'm also young. I was young. I was in my mid-20s, which is an interesting time because I was like starting to really understand things in a deep way, but I also was angry still. I also still had a little bit of like anger. But also, to be fair, racially, I'll probably always have a certain level of anger in the world, you know? So this woman, Dr. Wardy, we have to defend, you know, you defend your thesis. Mind you, I had three people that guided me on this thesis. One was a black man from Africa, from Senegal, Dr. Sen, who I loved. He knew that I was having a hard time. Why? I talked to him a lot about a lot of things. He was very helpful. He also happened to be, I think, like the hardest teacher in the world. And if you know anything about African politics, that shit is hard. It's like really hard to follow what the hell happened in Africa historically. Very hard. And then I had another woman who was an art teacher who was Indian, brilliant woman, art professor. Also a brown woman, dark brown woman. And then this other woman who was a Jewish, who was the head of the whole department. All these black people worked under her. And she was the head. So I went into it to defend my thesis, right? Remember I said I didn't even want to write the damn thing. It just was like, okay, you've led me no choice, and now I have half the time that all the other students have because you couldn't support me, that I just wrote about whatever. I thought it wasn't bad. It wasn't that interesting because I think similar things had been done, and I wanted to do something more radical. But it wasn't bad. And then I went to defend my thesis, you know, and everybody's sitting in the office, you know, and I walked up, and it started off bad because my shoe broke, brand new shoe broke right before I walked into the office. So I'm already like sad. And I knew it wasn't a brilliant piece of work, but like I said, I mean, I had less than half the time than all the other students did because they couldn't support me in my work. So I had to change it. So the Indian woman, she had read, I mean, she was reading every piece that I wrote, highlighting things, giving me feedback, right? I had edited this thing. It's like 70 or 80 pages long. I had edited this thing, you know, for months. I just spent months just editing. So, I mean, it wasn't horrible, obviously. I had this teacher literally reviewing everything. So I thought, well, I can't really do badly. I mean, they might not love what I'm saying, but the work was pretty quality. And my Dr. Sen hated it. He hated it.
Really?
He was really hilarious. He said he was on Skype because he was in Africa at the time. He said, Liana, he said, his exact words were, you are absolutely brilliant, but this is not good. Why did you write about this? Why? And meanwhile, I'm thinking, oh my God, because you guys just totally, you know, but whatever.
Yeah.
The other woman was kind of just like super defending me because she was the one who was like the one who walked me next to this. You know, she was the one who was like, I'm so sorry, baby. I know exactly how this happened and I'm so sorry. And we're just going to get you through it and you'll pass. So she was very empathetic. So then after we were talking, I left the room and I could hear them talking, you know, amongst themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the two black teachers, I'll just say they're both black for the sake of it, because the Indian woman's darker than I am, and then this black guy. So the POC teachers are defending it. You know, Dr. Sen's like, she's really brilliant. She's a brilliant student, and, you know, we didn't really support her. And I don't think it's great work. That's true, but I think it's on us. We didn't support her, whatever. The other woman was like, pretty much agreeing. She was like, yeah, it's on us. You know, I think all my other work from her has been great, blah, 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 blah. Mind you, I'm like high honors student. So this woman, the white woman in the room, this woman who I respected and I wanted her to like me so bad the whole time I was at this school, tore me to shreds. I mean, I was sitting, Adam, you should have seen how bad I was crying. I'm this grown woman dressed up to the nines, defending this trash thing that I didn't even want to do because, you know, and she's in there just like, this is garbage, you know, because they're fighting about the grade. And you have to have at least like, I don't know what the translation would be, but it would be, you have to have basically a B and above to pass. And I think that it was definitely a B. But the reality is it wasn't as smart as I'm capable of being, right? Because I'm very, very critical thinker. And they knew that. So to them, if some like student who wasn't very critically thoughtful wrote this, they would probably get a pretty good grade, because for them it would be like, but for me it was like, here, for what I was capable of doing intellectually, but that's because I had, less than half the time to do it. And I was pissed at this point. And I'm just sitting there in this chair, and I'm just, just almost having like a childhood tantrum, because I could just hear her just say, like, just basically call me just stupid, right? Like, that's pretty much how it was translated in my mind, was like, this is garbage. And I'm thinking, yeah, so where's your responsibility in this garbage? You know what I mean? Like, you're supposed to guide me, and you guys didn't. So yeah, if you would have, and she just tore me apart. No personal responsibility, even though, like, that's their job. And just tore me apart. And listening to these two Black teachers argue with this white woman, because she was trying to basically give me a D, which could have literally ruined my whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Was just heartbreaking. And I was just really sad, because this is a woman who, like, every time I went to talk to her at school, she would, like, be very supportive, or seemingly supportive, or be like, oh, you're on the right track, you're on the right track. Meanwhile, I obviously was not on the right track, but she would tell me that I was on the right track. So I was really hurt by it. And the moral of the story is, years later, I went back to the school, because I was working on another project publicly in the city. And I was getting, some feedback from a city project of this teacher, the Indian woman. And we were talking about that experience. It's like years and years later, I finished school, I graduated, everything went great. In fact, I graduated like top 10 of my whole class. And she was giggling, and I was like, what are you laughing at? And she's like, I just think it's really funny. This is a much older, Indian woman who's brilliant. She said, I just think it's funny that every time you tell, you think about this and you tell this story, you never think about how brilliant the two Black people in the room thought you were. You never think about it. She just looked at me and she said, every time you talk to me about this, because every time I would see her, I'd talk about it. You never think about the fact that these two Black people thought you were absolutely brilliant and fought for you every step of the way. You only worry about that woman. You only worry about Dr. Wardy. And I said, like, damn. She's so right? Because she's an old, wise woman, right? And I really feel like, Adam, that like story sort of like culminates like what's happened in my life. So instead of knowing, I could have an issue happen and I could show it to all my brilliant Black professors, teachers, parents, friends, right? All the most brilliant people that I know, even white people that I know that I consider to be brilliant, anybody. And they would go, this is okay. And then it's like, I don't even care if one white woman says that it's trash. And, I've been exploring, I don't know. I guess that's what I'm saying to you, is I'm just trying to have this like exploration around, because I hate it. I hate it. Yeah. I hate that it makes me so anxious when, even if I get validated, even if I read it to you, I read, you read all these people read my thesis, and they all said like, yeah, it's not the best, but it's not bad. And, you only had half the time to write it. So I think it's great. Like, that's not enough. I need this one woman who's also the highest, right? I need that validation. And I hate that anxiety that I initially get when a white woman says this is not good, right? And it's usually because they feel offended in some way. But it's like when they say it's not good, I just get overcome. And then I have to separate myself and say, Liana, that's what they want you to do. They want you to react. And they will hold it against you. So then I separate myself from it, and I try to get firm in what it really is, like have a real conversation with myself. Like, was it really garbage? Did you really make a mistake?
So just in a little bit of time we have left. No, that was it really painted a full, thorough picture. So thank you for that. So here are a few things that I'm picking up. Here's just one that I kind of want to flesh out now, and then there's two other things that I might encourage you to do in between now and the next time. So for one thing, I really have to point out how many words you use that are related to parenting and child rearing. So you talk about, yeah, you point, You pointed out having white parents, and the story was really interesting uh, because um, that line that your that the female
Professor, yeah, her
professor,
name, yeah, I gotta remember her name. But anyway,
uh,
yeah.
but it does have impact because of the way that you tell the story and because of the way you told the whole story, which is basically that if white men, black men, women of color insults you, it's not. It kind of bounces off, and then white women,
Simultaneously,
it's
when
this.
they say I'm awesome, it also bounces off.
It also bounces off, right? So you say you have white parents, and parenting is tough because it sets a lot of expectations of who you're going to be, of what you're capable of, and not just what you're capable of, but what other people are going to recognize as your capabilities of. And it can be hard when parents are used to telling you how wonderful you are. There can be a sense of like, well, why aren't other people doing this? So I connected your parents to the idea of expectations, um, and through that, you're talking about white women and higher expectations, and how that lets you have your trust. And at the same time, your mother just passed away, uh, and it sounds like that validation that you're looking for from white women, um, many say it's like the purest sense of that sounded like it was coming from your mother. Um,
Oh yeah,
and
I mean, I don't actually consciously like give a crap what these people think, you know.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's like
but
it's clearly like happening in me. It's like
yeah,
I don't want it to, and I intellectually, you know, don't care.
but the other way that I connected it to, um, and this is how it comes all full circle for me, is when you talked about higher expectations from white women, you gain their trust, and then they punish you. And immediately I thought back to, right, who really gets punished is children. Children get punished. And you talked about how devastated you were uh, after this your thesis defense, and you described your crying as a tantrum.
Well, yeah, I was alone, but I was definitely
Yeah,
like I was so upset.
and that led to you feeling stupid or not enough, which is really how you started the session, was by talking about these things.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I just wanted to point out all these connections that I heard through parenting, child rearing. Seems like there's a lot we could explore there. I also want. I also was thinking about two potential ways that you could explore these two different sides of yourself that you're exploring. Um, you have associated, this feeling stupid or not enough, this one feeling of yourself, this walking on eggshells, and then you talked about this fearlessness, which you associated with being raised essentially white. Um, what I find really interesting is that you are in a pretty fearless profession, uh, confronting people on their privileges and biases, and looking out for the things that are going to make them defensive. That to me is a pretty fearless profession to be in, um, and at the same time, feeling stupid or not enough. There's a real tension in that. So one thing that we might do in the future is maybe have a conversation between the two sides of yourself, where maybe uh, you address your stupid or not enough side as your fearless self, and then have a conversation back as the fearless, stupid, not enough person back, and really see what are these two sides of yourself saying to you. The other thing, the other way that we could approach that is through the metaphor of walking on eggshells, which came um, which came back when you talked about treading lightly, you know, the symbolism does recur. You know, this idea of everything I do is loud, waiting for it. And, you know, like the idea of the question I ask about this is that if you feel like everything you do is loud, who is going to hear it?
So I thought about that. That's funny you say that. I think, again, that's connected to the white womanhood, because that's who always hears it. That's who always hears it, because I think there's so much projection in that, because it's like, as soon as I challenge based off of my knowledge and education, they flip it back and say, no, it's like the argument about reverse racism, which is obviously not a thing, but it's like, that's what happens when I challenge them, like, for a living. That's what I do. I'll say, well, this is what it is. This is what you're doing. For sure, right? This is what I'm seeing. It's the same thing all the time. And then they'll flip it on me and say, no, you're the one who's biased. No, you're the one. And it's just like, oh my God, why am I even doing this? You know, like, I just quit everything, right? But I mean, I think that's what, you know, that's that power, again, that I personally associate with white womanhood, because that was my mom. I think that all of that is playing out, you know?
I just to continue it, I think that just thinking a little bit more about and I do think you picked the metaphor for a reason, walking on eggshells. I want you to think, like, what are the eggshells? Are you really afraid that the eggshells would break? Because to me, when I think about your work, it sounds like wanting some eggshells to break seems pretty appropriate for your work.
Yeah, but it's harmful to me.
But it's harmful to you.
Yeah.
So we
like
do
I
have
do,
to.
but it's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice.
Right.
I'm sacrificing myself. I just
Right.
imagine an eggshell like going through my chest when you said that. But just like, it's a sacrifice to me, because these people are so violent towards me for when I do my job, or when I challenge something in a way that they don't like. They become violent. They use racialized language, call me things, whatever. Their ego defense mechanisms come out, whatever it is. And they don't see it. They don't see it. And that's what also makes it so, and these are experts. And I think that that's what makes it hard for me too, is, you know, I'm talking to people who in their world, like, I work with a lot of therapists. I train a lot of therapists, and they'll come at me, right, because of what I do, and not see themselves in it. And that's hard for me, because I'm not a therapist, but I am like a race and gender specialist and like a bias specialist. Like, so it's just so hard, Adam. Like, it's just so hard to find this balance, because it's.
So I think that we do have to go, but again, there is a little bit of a tension between how you're describing walking on eggshells, because the way that you describe it right now is totally different how you described it at the beginning of the session. When you talked about walking on eggshells, you talked about it as this way of like, I gotta tread lightly, and now you're talking about it as this like, I'm going to crush those eggshells. It's going to hurt me, and that's just and you talk about it as like that's how it's going to be, and that's what's going to keep on happening. But when you talked about it at the beginning of the session, the way you talked about walking on eggshells was a little bit different. There was a little bit more trepidation about walking on the eggshells. So I just wanted to point out that tension. And at this point, if it's okay with you, I think we can leave that for the next time.
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. All right. Yeah, I'll see you next time. Yeah.